The Navy, Army and Air Force Institutes are almost 100 years old, better known as the Naafi. They provided food, cups of tea, staged dances and put on entertainment for millions of British servicemen all over the world. A new book called Canteen Army charts the history of the Naafi.
Out for weeks at a time. Daring raids in the pitch dark, raids into the heart of the enemy's country.
Mary, here they come.
One big call. Bang on these boys, please, Mary. Tea, please, Mary. 3 cups of tea, Susan, please. Coming to the dance tonight, Mary?
Why don't you join in? It's fun.
Don't know what we'd do without them.
We need 600 girls every week.
Come and help them.
We need you. See you soon.
Well, an incredible piece of archive footage, a cinema feature from 1942 to encourage more people to help with the Naafis. And joining us on the line is the author of Canteen Army, the Naafi Story, which is out now, Nathan Morley. Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Matthew.
Joining us all the way from Cyprus, I think.
Indeed, and I think in a rare occasion where we have worse weather than you.
Oh, really? You've got a bit of something happening at the moment, have you?
We've got a little storm going on, which, well, it has been going on now for 4 days.
But Nathan, tell us, we've just listened to that amazing piece of history just now, and it shows, I think, what an important part of the war effort it was back in those dark days.
Oh, I think so, yeah. And a forgotten part of the war effort has sadly been sidelined over the years. Without the Naafi, the Army, the Air Force or the Navy really couldn't have operated. We're talking about an organization which was not only in most theaters of war, it was also, of course, right across the Empire and Great Britain and even right there on your doorstep in Norfolk. They had the 58 RAF bases and 58 Naafis on every single one of them.
And did each one differ? It's like a social club, really. You explain, Nathan. It started in the 1920s, didn't it?
Yes, it was actually devised by Winston Churchill, and it was the idea was to make sure that they called it service to the services, to make sure that those in the armed forces were able to get a meal, a cup of tea, buy cigarettes, chocolate, whatever they wanted on their bases, on their ships, wherever they happened to be. And they were, wherever the forces were, there was a Naafi, even at the smallest garrisons and bases up in the Highlands of Scotland and right throughout the capital, London. I think there were 100 at one point in London. And the idea was making the life of the Tommy, of the soldier, a little bit easier. And that's actually what they're still doing today.
But also Navy and Air Force as well, as the title Naafi suggests. Indeed,
and the three services were all served by Naafi. There was no difference, if whichever colour uniform you wore, the Naafi were there and the doors were open to you. At sea, it was slightly different though. The Naval Canteen Service obviously saw a lot of action because they were on board the boats. So if the boat went into battle, Naafi were with them, and they were required to put down, the teapot and help on board. And there were many times when that happened.
Who operated the Naafi then? Were people brought in conscripted, or were they volunteers?
No, it wasn't conscription. It was all a voluntary effort with a salary. The problem with it was that with the manpower shortage, so many men going off to war and women working in other services, that there was always difficulty filling the posts. And if you go through the National Archives, one of the newspapers between 1939 and 44, almost every edition of every newspaper will contain an advert for the Naafi recruiting. At one point, in 1944, there was 120,000 people on the payroll.
So that shows the scale of it, but the Second World War would have been the biggest time for the Naafi, wouldn't it?
And without a doubt, it was huge, and the demand, because of course that's when the forces were that's when they peaked. I think there were huge amounts of, just as many men abroad as there were in the UK, and of course we had American servicemen coming. We had all of the servicemen from Europe here as well, the Poles, etc. So that's when they peaked. But then again, after the war as well, during the occupation years in Germany, the British forces were deployed to Germany, and they're still there. Well, for the next year or so, the Naafi followed them there: Cyprus, Gibraltar, Hong Kong. So it didn't get much. It did obviously shrink a little bit, but not much until the 60s.
Let's just remind everyone we're speaking to the author Nathan Morley, who's written this book about, well, we're almost up to 100 years of history for the Naafi, the Navy, Army and Air Force Institutes, and his book is called Canteen Army, the Naafi Story. Nathan, what prompted you to write it?
Really, I'm a reporter by profession, and I'm a very curious person. And I've also done stints at British Forces bases when I was younger in Germany. And in the past few years, I've been traveling quite a lot. Anyway, to cut a long story short, something cropped up where I was interested to know a little bit more about Naafi, and there wasn't really a great deal about it. There were scraps of information here and there. And the more I dug, and the more interesting the story became, because you imagine a unit which has been in every single theatre of war, from World War I, Korea, the Falklands, Afghanistan, Iraq, World War II. It's incredible. Unlike regiments which serve in certain campaigns, Naafi was almost in every single one. And of course, there's also the social history aspect as well. The families who were served by Naafi, the dependents, the wives. And the story just grew and grew, Matthew, and it got so big, I thought there's definitely an untold tale here. There's a book in it, and here it is.
Did you do a lot of interviews with veterans?
Yes, there was a huge amount of groundwork, certainly in Germany, where Naafi really made its name after 1945, because that's, of course, where most British forces were. In the book, there were interviews with the oldest veteran of Naafi. She's 93, Eve, and she recounts her days in the late 40s and the early 50s during the Korean War. There are people who were in the Falklands War talking about their experiences, and there's a vast amount of archive material from Naafi itself, publications and periodicals, which there weren't many copies left, but there were some deep in the National Archives in London, which I managed to get hold of as well. So there's a lot of research to try and build this picture, and the more that came together, the more fascinating the story was.
The idea then of Naafi, what was and is, to provide some home comforts and keep up morale. And when you spoke to particularly some of the older people involved, do you find that people spoke about it very fondly and indeed maybe say, well, I met my husband or wife through the Naafi?
Exactly that. Exactly. You would not believe how many people met their husbands through the Naafi. In fact, in 1942, there was a report that came out, a Naafi a memo, that they were losing most of their staff to young soldiers who came in, who they were serving, and so many were getting married and leaving to have families that it became almost uncontrollable. And that was always the way with the Naafi. In fact, I was doing a piece the other day talking about this very subject, and somebody remarked to me, well, I know somebody who met their husband in the Naafi. And this crops up many times. It was because, of course, it was a social environment, and soldiers are social animals. There was a lot of fraternization.
But side by side with Naafi, there was also in the war ENSA, wasn't there? The entertainment service. And well, I think you probably know, like a lot of us, what ENSA was called by some of the troops.
Yes, well, I won't repeat what ENSA. There are many different names given to ENSA and its performances and the quality of its
I was
product.
thinking of every night something awful.
That's exactly right. And ENSA was a part of Naafi. That's another little known fact, which seems to have passed many people by. ENSA was actually run from theatre in Drury Lane, and their finances, their organisation, it was all under Naafi control. And they had a huge operation. In fact, by 1940, there had only been an operation a year. They were running more live programmes, wait for this, I know this will upset you, than the BBC. It was an incredible organisation. So,
not only Naafi sort of was a matchmaker and probably prompted the baby boom after the war, but it also spawned virtually all the great entertainers of those post-war years. People like the Goons and everyone else, Michael Bentine, people like that, they all came together and coalesced around the ENSA phenomenon, didn't they?
Oh yeah, the Ensa gave them their first taste of the grease paint, and walking on stage. And you mentioned the Goons and Peter Sellers. He was absolutely dotty about Naafi and Ensa. He wrote most of his gags in the Naafi. Where I'm talking to you from now, just a few miles down the road, John Barry, who of course went on to be an Oscar-winning composer, learned how to play music in the Naafi in a base at Decalia in Cyprus. Tommy Cooper got his act through the Naafi. One day he used to do an act where he would wear a tin hat, and somebody had nabbed it. So he asked one of the waiters in a Naafi in Egypt for his fez. You know the rest of the story. It went down so well, it became the Tommy Cooper trademark. So Ensa has what they did and what they created is still all around us today.
And it was just like that, all thanks to the Navy, Army and Air Force Institutes. And Nathan, your book is called Canteen Army, the Naafi Story. How can people pick up a copy?
Best place to go is straight to Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, which is an immediate download, or paperback, and that'll be with you very quickly. And you can get it on Amazon wherever you are in the world. Of course, in Britain, amazon.co.uk.